Hello, I'm Susan Nash, AAPG. I'm really happy to be here today. We have something rather different today. We're talking about technology trends and the energy supply chain, but most of all, economic implications and also energy transition implications. And it could be potentially a little bit controversial. We hope so. We have a great lineup. And I want to mention that this is a wonderful opportunity to partner with Texas A&M University, Texarkana. They have a supply chain program, master's and also undergraduate. So that's really exciting. And they also have a really well-established College of Business, Engineering and Technology. So lots of exciting things there. And our other co-hosts are AAPG Division of Professional Affairs and our AAPG Deep Learning TIG. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn the platform over first to Meredith Faber, who's president of AAPG DPA. And just before she speaks, I just want to mention we have a really cool line of panelists. We have Alex Tardecilla and Larry Davis, Tom Smith, Bill Fairhurst, Jamie Daigle, and I'll just keep the schedule up for a second so you can see it. And welcome, Meredith.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that introduction. Good morning, afternoon, evening, late night to those of you joining us from the various far reaches of the world. Very pleased to be here this morning. As you may be aware, the Division of Professional Affairs deals a lot with some of the business of energy, and certainly supply chain management in the business of supply chains is something that we are concerned with. So I'm very happy to be here today to participate in this interesting session. Susan has a very dynamic group of panelists here. So I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. But I know that we were all asked to provide what challenges that we're facing with currently energy supply chains. And I put as my answer that adapting to diversifying markets is something that I'm interested in hearing more about. Certainly with the energy transition and expanding into alternative fuels and things of that nature and alternative sources of energy, it's important to make sure that our supply chains are stable and able to cope with those transitions. Certainly those of you maybe in Texas, the recent deep freeze that we had in February is an example of maybe a supply chain failure. So happy to hear what everyone has to say, and I will put the DPA's contact information in the chat so that you have the information on how you can reach us and learn more about our credentialing programs and other program offerings. Thank you.
That's great. And I just want to mention that we are recording this, and that we will have the recording available for everyone afterwards. And also want to mention that that we'll be sharing it with Texas A&M Texarkana. So I'd like to also now turn the platform over to Patrick Ng.
Well, welcome everyone. I chair the AAPG Deep Learning Technical Interest Group. Well, very simple. The energy transition is real, and we're actually in a structural change in supply and demand. So with so many moving parts in the supply chain, for example, when we transition from fossil energy to renewables, carbon capture and storage, geothermal, hydrogen, and critical minerals. Well, there's so many moving parts, but yet, as far as I understand, we're still expected to run the business the best we can while adapt to change. So at the Deep Learning Technical Interest Group, we stand ready to help develop the best practice in data and analytics for portfolio of energy mix and help manage the risk in the transition. Now, just for the background, supply chain sometimes is set by geology. 80 million years ago, in the back is the Western Waterway. It explains why we have this shale sweet spots, because that's the marine shale. It just kind of behind my head. It's going from the Gulf of Mexico all the way cut through Canada. So if you find those sweet spots, start 80 million years ago. Going forward, we're going to see more technology, and it's not just shale, but in many other areas. So I would also provide a link to Deep Learning Technical Interest Group discussion board, and feel free to chime in after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, Gary Stading, who's the Dean of the College of Business, Engineering, and Technology, mentioned to me that he has overlapping meetings, so he might be a little bit late. But I thought that in the interim, let's have Larry Davis give a quick introduction. Larry Davis is the former Dean of the College of Business, Engineering, and Technology.
At least you didn't say it has been, Dean. I heard a story one time. The new dean, they're known as the dean, the new dean, and then the dean, and then the damn dean, and then the former dean. So that's the transition we go through. Anyhow, our president has a town hall meeting most Friday mornings. It starts at 10. And since Gary's the dean, he's probably logged into that. So I'm sure he'll show up later. I'm happy to be here. During the process of preparing for this, we kind of, think about things going on around us, but when you get tagged by Susan as a presenter, you have to think a little more deeply. And it's been interesting to dig into some of the things that are going on around us in general and also within the energy industry. So I'm also happy to be here as a presenter, but also here to listen to what others have to say. So happy to be here, Susan, and everyone else.
You're on mute, Susan.
Thank you. Yes. So I want to mention too that we have participants here today from Canada, Mexico, and Pakistan, as well as US and potentially other places. So that's great. So let's go to our first presenter, Alex Tardecilla, and we'll share the platform with him. And really happy to welcome you.
Well, thank you. Glad to be part of this exercise again, Susan. I'm having a slight technical problem with my camera, so you won't be able to see what I look like, but I'll be happy to share with you my PowerPoint presentation. Let's see, how does this work now? Okay, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So the topic of my presentation today is very simple. My background is in supply chain management. I have 25 years of experience having worked for the Canadian Airlines International, which is now part of Air Canada here in Canada. I've also worked briefly at FedEx on the sales side, but learned a lot about their operations, spent 3 weeks in Memphis, looking at the 3 football fields of FedEx's operations, where the flights come in and then go out. They handle all their freight globally. From then I transitioned into the oil patch. In 2006, my wife and I left Toronto and we came to to Alberta, Calgary, which is the center of the oil patch in Canada. And so my presentation is sharing on post-award contracts management from the oil patch to geothermal energy projects. And the theme of mitigating the risk through the contracts management. It's not a very popular subject. When I found out when I arrived here in 2006, no one wanted to do contracts, but I remember meeting an engineer, a mechanical engineer from Shell. He says, "You know what? Do you have contracts experience?" I said, "Why is that?" Well, because that's very critical to our business. There's so much risk in terms of procurement, maintaining the contract obligations of the company and of the contractors, and saving money. So my theme, I have adopted this I see a lot of themes in the pivoting from the oil patch to renewable energy, and there's a lot of transferable skills. So this picture here is taken, I borrowed it from Iceland. This is the Hellishady geothermal plant, just half an hour outside of Reykjavik. I attended the 4th International Geothermal conference there. I was very fortunate because the Canadian government sponsored our part of our trip. Okay, so global pivoting. There's a global pivot of from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and these are the main drivers, in my opinion. First off is the 2015 U.S. Paris Agreement, where they, I think, signatory 132 countries, if I'm not mistaken, said, hey, we're going to reduce our greenhouse emissions by 2050. Very aggressive. In my opinion, that's you know, a tall order, and you see a lot of countries now committing to that, especially including Canada and the United States. Number 2, divestments in the oil patch. In 2019, Shell got rid of their assets in our oil sands, or AKA tar sands. In 2020, Norway divested its investments with major producers, ExxonMobil, Shell. And of course, in January of this year, US President Biden revoked the license for the Keystone XL pipeline permit. And I'm currently on contract at TC Energy, which is one of the major pipelines here. That company lost $16 billion Canadian on investment. Federally, we've got the Government of Canada, which is one of the signatories to the 2015. They've also committed to renewable energy legislation, and had given $24 million of funding to deep geothermal project, which is just outside of Alberta here. And she's doing very well. Kirsten Marcia is the president and principal of that project, and I think they are almost ready to produce electricity. Again, in 2020, there was in the industry, Pivot 2020, they call it, from the oil patch to geothermal. There was, I believe, this was driven by folks from the oil patch who were interested in developing and transferring their skills to geothermal. And then finally, the government of Alberta 2 years ago passed their geothermal development legislation. And just close to my home here in southern Alberta, they funded the Alberta #1 geothermal project, which is just northwest of Calgary. So what are the risks? Some of the risks faced by geothermal projects, and I looked at the previous projects that I've worked at in the oil patch, from from Apache, ConocoPhillips, and most recently Husky, which is now part of Cenovus. And there are themes here: geological, for example, environmental, economic, financial, human resources. And some of the questions that I see that needs to be asked, for example, geological, unproven source of a constant high temperature subsurface. So this is the theme in geothermal. We want to make sure that there is constant temperature subsurface. And luckily, we have that natural resource west of Alberta, where it's been proven that because we are part of the what they call the ring of fire, there is constant 120 degrees Celsius of temperature that can be harnessed to produce electricity. Environmental is fracking. If fracking is required, then what are the governmental regulations for the area? And can we avoid fracking in order to avoid causing minor tremors? One example that we spoke with in AAPG's geothermal class is there was an incident in South Korea that created a minor tremor because they were fracking for geothermal. So that's an environmental risk there. Economic, can geothermal produce electricity compete against natural gas? Again, based on my research for one of my papers for the geothermal certificate that I'm working on, is especially here in Alberta, there is the infrastructure already of natural gas. And if a new energy source such as geothermal, can we compete against that? You know, especially with front end costs for geothermal drilling completions are very high. How can we compete? Financial. Okay, financial, where will the project obtain seed money? From the government, from private investors. When I attended the conference in 2016, there was talk of, you know, involving banks getting involved with geothermal, but it's still very risky. So it's very difficult to attract seed money for geothermal projects. Human resources. How can we attract workers from the oil patch? And can members of our First Nations or Indigenous communities participate? Especially with commitment by companies on the ESG, economic, social, and governance. So those are some of the risks that projects are faced, that I think will be faced by geothermal projects. And how do we mitigate this? Again, from the oil patch, we've used the Master Service Agreement, which is a formal agreement between two parties, mainly between the main producer, such as Shell or ConocoPhillips, and a contractor. In this case, I'm using an example of drilling and completions contractor, such as Schlumberger. And this is the primary form of the you know, contracting in the oil and gas industry. And I see this migrating, and if I'm not mistaken, already in the geothermal space. And one of the main functions of service agreements is it articulates the expectations of the parties. For example, for the company, return on investment, the completion of the project, and for the contractor for profit, and also for their to make sure that they provide a good service. Number two, a mechanism. It provides a mechanism for governance and issue resolution, and it acts as a scorecard, which is to examine performance. So my background has been, in the past 15 years, has been focused on post-contract management, which is very important to making sure that the project is complete in a timely fashion, and we save money. You know, we don't have any overages. Some of the questions addressed by the MSAs is very lengthy, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of things. For example, what is the main scope of work? So, well, what do we want this drilling and completions contractor do? Or what do we want with this environmental Stantec, for example? What do we want them to do? So that has to be defined before we award the contract. Another question, what are the restrictions to get to the project location? Are there existing roads? So these has to be defined prior to going out to market, and also designing the contract. Additional questions, who are the stakeholders? You know, the project sponsor. I'm on a current project right now where we're upgrading a compressor station in the middle, in the middle of a community northwest of Toronto. And so every time that we, before we install the major component, for example, the turbine or the compressor, we have to go and advise our neighbors that this is what we're doing. You know, there's potential noise that they may experience. So it's just out of respect for the communities.
So
Okay, what would the
Alex,
project cost?
this is,
Yes.
don't mean to jump in, but you've kind of run over your time.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So
Yeah.
anyway, we'll just, you just jump to the last slide if you don't mind, and then we'll,
Sure. Sorry about that.
oh, that's okay. So,
The rest is all, okay, I just want to focus on what the tools that we use in terms of technology. Of course, MS Office, SAP. We have SAP Ariba, essentially for contracts, post-contract management, contracts repository. And I will share this slides with you. This is me. This
That's
was
great.
in Reykjavik. And so
oh,
this is me. Thank you very much for the time.
thank you.
Sorry about going overboard.
That's okay. So, so I'd like to go ahead and ask our invite our next speaker to share the platform. And that would be Larry Davis.
Susan, I don't have a PowerPoint, so I don't need to share the.
Okay, so
Screen
just
with-
that's okay. Just chat and talk to us, and it's all good.
Okay, give me a gong when my time is up. So
Okay.
I'm not running the timer. By way of introduction, my field is not, my profession is not in the energy industry. So I'll be speaking from the perspective of an economist and also touch upon supply chain things. And then my colleague, Jamie Daigle, will follow up later and talk more specifically about supply chain. I've been teaching a variety of economics courses at the university level for more than 50 years. And I know it don't look like I could have done that, but it's true. But anyway, there are some interesting and strange things happening today, but by way of background, we've had some good models to use in teaching and discussing economics to address certain problems, primarily unemployment or inflation over the years. And one of the major ones that happened in history was the Great Depression. And of course, John Maynard Keynes came along with a model. And I guess that was a good testing ground for it. It was not totally successful in addressing the unemployment rate that peaked out in excess of 20% during that time. The unfortunate thing, it took the World War II to get the unemployment rate down to a manageable and an acceptable level. And so we moved through that. During World War II, we didn't have the major inflation that we could have had because of the wage and price controls that took effect and were somewhat effective. But with that going on, a lot of young people were wound up in the military, but in probably just about as large would be the civilians who supported the war effort. A lot of civilians went to work, and they were supplying and providing such things all the way from ammunition to military clothing to transportation. And a lot of them that I was aware of, not aware of, but from hearing the stories, that they would rent rooms in houses at temporary work locations. They were making a lot of money and not spending it. So a lot of pent up energy. And when the war was over, a lot of the soldiers came home and got married, started families, and that pent up revenue or income that people had, they started spending it on houses and refrigerators and things of that nature that a young family would need. And the inflation rate popped up. But as we move forward, we've had ups and downs. And I guess we say the Keynesian model was fairly effective and not totally effective. Then we move up to the 70s and 80s. We had some economic crises in this country that were addressed. And then as we move along, we get up to 2019 and we get a report that some person, I think in the state of Washington, got diagnosed with something called COVID-19, a pandemic. And then after that, all hell broke loose. I mean, it's kind of like a swirling sewer, where water is running out of it. And we didn't have any models to deal with it. We still don't. And my testimony is I was feeling great in December 2019. And on the 29th, I had a fever that went up to 103 when I got diagnosed. And I got to enjoy firsthand the COVID-19 experience. And I certainly don't recommend it to anyone. So, but looking economically at what happened, early in 2020, restaurants were particularly affected and other retail stores, not by their choice, but because of the edicts that came from a lot of the state governors. It caused a lot of them to shut down. And in a lot of instances, they had the 25% capacity limitation for people coming into the restaurants or their establishments. The problem with that, there are economies of scale, and you can't, make a profit at 25% of your capacity. But the immediate significant impacts related to supply chain, a lot of the employees were laid off. But on the other hand, if the restaurants were not selling their meals at the level that they had previously been selling, there was no need to be ordering the meat supplies, the produce, the things that they served, and therefore enters an interruption of the supply chain. There's no need of the trucks coming in and bringing the merchandise. So we had a backlog in the warehouses and even a backlog in some of the fields where products didn't get harvested. And I heard at one point there was a shortage of chicken. There was not a shortage of chicken. The people were laid off and they couldn't get them to come back to work. Government steps in with the things it has to offer. One of those things being the stimulus checks, which were fairly insignificant. I mean, a couple of checks and people find a way to spend them because they needed to. But on the other hand, the unemployment compensation that people were entitled to, they did a supplementary $300 a week, and you do the math on that. And if a person had been making $8 an hour, they made more by staying home. Our good, great grandfather in economics, Adam Smith, back in the 1700s, he reminded us that we are motivated by our own self-interest. And if a person becomes unemployed and they can make more money staying at home than they can working, it's kind of a no-brainer. So the government's part of the problem there. Of course, I've noticed that several of the states are eliminating that, so it should change some things and people start coming back to work. Other effects in other retail establishments, people chose, or the edicts prohibited them from going into stores, and local businesses suffered because people wouldn't come in, but they had an option. They did a lot of online purchasing, so it made a transition to our spending habits. In terms of particular industries, I mean, tourism took a plunge. You read and heard about what happens with the tourist ships, the cruise ships, sporting events. You have a football stadium out there that'll hold 100 people, then they cancel the season, or cancel the games, or shut them down or cut them down to 25% capacity. When tickets cost $100 a piece, that's a big loss for them. So they were impacted. So transitioning into the energy industry, first presenter, mentioned the pipeline thing, and it had an economic impact. And I guess, was it South Dakota where they were working and shut down? I'm sure a major impact there. And but there seems to be a lot of ignorance, or maybe stupidity, or whatever words we use, in politicians making decisions. That doesn't mean that the oil is not coming down to Texas from Canada to go to the refineries to transition to gasoline. There are alternative modes of transportation, such as trucks, such as rail cars, such as ships. But they made mention that the pipelines were environmentally unsafe. Well, what happens if you get those trucks on the road and 2 or 3 of them have collisions and explosions, or what about the leakage of ships into the waterways that they're traveling in? So that was an issue with them also.
I say, Larry, you've got like a minute.
Okay, I'll quickly go through them. So back to the gasoline thing that happened, the extortion thing that took place. Paid out $4.4 million. I don't know why, the details of that, but that seems to open the door for additional additional similar situations, people wanting to pay ransom. So as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a swirling situation. There are no economic models out there to offer up major solutions and fixes how to address the problems. And we kind of seem to be feeling along politically, right or wrong, and making maybe some few good decisions, a lot of wrong decisions. So we're in a mess, and hopefully that can be corrected as we move forward and the supply chain gets smoothed out again and we start getting back to some normalcy, whatever that is. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate that, and it's a good overview. Like to invite Tom Smith now to share the screen, and he's going to talk about supply chains and alternative energy, some of the challenges and opportunities that he's involved in.
All right. I'm happy to be here speaking to y'all today from Denver. Can everyone hear me all right?
You might boost it up a little bit. It's a little bit.
Okay. How's that working? Any better?
Yeah, use your outdoor voice.
Okay. Let's go back, start this thing. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is domestic critical minerals sources. So I think we all know what critical minerals are. They're defined essentially as minerals critical to a country's well-being economically and in the world space. And right now in the United States and even Canada, most of the critical minerals are sourced from China. A lot of lithium gets a lot of press. You've also got things in Congo that are used in battery making. That's another source, as is in the brine world. The basin there in South America, in Chile, that kind of came to the forefront for sourcing lithium out of brines. And so my talk today is about mining the brine. And actually, we can do that domestically. In general, anywhere where we're producing deep, non-potable water sources, these brines are a source of minerals, many of them being critical and some being rare earth elements. And so our company, U.S. Strategic Minerals, is a shareholder LLC, founded a couple years ago by 6 veteran oil and gas industry professionals. Most of us are 35 to 40-year vets in oil and gas. And we do something a little different. We take a hybrid approach to exploring for minerals. And when I say minerals, I mean oil, gas, brine, anything that comes out of the ground, anything that people are spending capital on and drilling into the ground for. That's our biz. And we're going to maximize the value chain and keep it domestic. And so that's a lofty goal. And we're going to use this approach to address 2 global challenges right now. And those are, the socioeconomic effects of climate change caused by carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, and the foreign dominance of critical mineral and rare earth supply chains. And our business model targets, and these are all naturally occurring brine reservoirs, deep underground, non-potable, and also many industrial waste streams. And these industrial waste streams, in my space, in my experience, are produced waters from oil and gas fields, mainly in the pre-horizontal drilling phase, where you have these big water floods going on. You're moving hundreds of thousands of barrels of water a day that are actually brines that can be mined. One of our business models has to do with a supply chain that was mentioned early on by one of the hosts, and that was de-icer. There are some brines that can be produced from the subsurface that are spec quality for using for ice control. They really could have had some of that down in Texas, and I wish we had some to supply for them, but we'll be ready hopefully for the next one of those. Secondly, our business model focuses around carbon capture processing technology. And we've got some patented processes under development. We're doing some lab scale testing We're applying for DOE grants as we speak, and we're ready to do some upscale to demonstration scale testing this year. So that's pretty exciting, part of our company. We're also focused on exploration for new brine reservoirs and using our expertise in locating oil and gas reservoirs. Obviously, most oil and gas reservoirs have a water leg, and that's what we're looking for. And most geologists have it's pretty easy to find that water leg. It's a lot easier than finding oil and gas. So we feel pretty confident. We put a well down. We're going to find one of those three, and they all can make money for us. So it's a real good risk mitigation idea that sometimes people can't really grasp if they've been in oil and gas. And we kind of talk about thinking outside of the barrel. I mean, if you're an oil and gas person, all you see is if it's not oil or gas, water is bad. Well, I'm here to tell you from now on, water is good. And brine water is good, even if you can't drink it. We can clean it up. We can take minerals out of it. So our carbon footprint reduction technologies are focusing on helping high carbon emitting industries solve their problem with their carbon footprint. And, I won't go into too much detail. Everybody kind of knows what this is, but it is funded and it's come to awareness, especially with the Biden administration coming in. There's a lot of money coming from the DOE and the government to move this forward in conjunction with money from these heavy carbon emitting industry corporations. But what I want to focus on and what's I think more relevant to our field of expertise is that these oil and gas fields and these mining sites, and you typically have CO2 that's used for EOR potentially, or just pipelines coming from these areas that contain CO2 that's actually human caused. And you've got this wastewater, and there's large volumes of this. So if we can marry those two with our carbon capture technology, you've got low feedstock costs. You can actually commercialize this process. And how we commercialize it is we actually precipitate minerals with our process using CO2, the calcium and the magnesium in the brine, and we can actually precipitate alkaline carbonate materials, calcium carbonate being one, magnesium carbonate being another one. The PCC, or precipitated calcium carbonate, in calcite form is very valuable. It's been used for many, many years as paper stiffener and whitener, and as a white paint base, and also in pharmaceuticals and for other industrial uses, water purification, gas drying, different things. In low grade form, and this is really where we think we can capture a lot of carbon, and you can actually make a road base. We can make an aggregate that's used in concrete. Well, limestone's the most mined mineral in the world. So if we can actually sequester CO2 and make some aggregate to reduce the amount of mining that's needed, there's a heck of a market for it. As we all know, concrete's huge. And so we got this new green mile trademarked road-based material that we hope to demonstrate and move forward and get some interest from these larger cement and concrete and aggregate companies. Our approach really looks at reducing the foreign dependence on the rare earths and the critical minerals. We can do that domestically. All we got to do is look at what we've done, for our careers here, and we produced all this water, but we just re-inject it down into the ground, forget about it. But really, it's another revenue stream. Okay, so we need capital infusion. These operators that have a lot of water that they're moving, it makes perfect sense for them to kind of the 3 R's: reclaim, reuse, and repurpose. Everything that we take out of the ground that Mother Nature gives us is put there for us to use. It's incumbent on us, I feel, to reclaim it and reuse it and repurpose it. And that's our theme right now, is using these oil field brines and these industrial waste sites that exist out there from all this mining and mineral extraction over the years. As they
Got
say,
1 minute, Tom.
Okay. DOE is funding a lot of things. We've got some FOAs underway right now. We've got Colorado School of Mines partnered with us on some of these. Those are going to be very exciting and relevant. But we can actually find a solution to the ESG problem that many companies have right now. So let me just kind of go, and obviously Section 45Q tax credits apply in the United States for, carbon capture of certain scale. And I guess as I close, use deep drilling for brines and instead of these open pit and evap ponds that are common in South America, because you've already got the minerals in the brine. You don't have to concentrate it down, expose a lot of humans to that process. Everything's done underground for you already. All you have to do is directly extract those minerals out. And that's basic chemistry. And that's really where we're at. So don't close in any idle wellbores until you've looked at all the mineral loading. Look at your water analyses, see what's in it, and make a plan to extract those minerals. Thank you very much. If anyone of you get up in Denver, holler at us. We'd love to meet one-on-one.
Well, thank you. I just love the new technology and the fact that this could potentially have a big impact on what is right now a very constrained supply chain. So thank you. So our next presenter is Bill Fairhurst. I invite him to share the platform. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And Susan, I also don't have slides, so I've got an outline, and in my outline, what I want to do is just kind of introduce these topics as I go through and make a comment or two.
Yeah.
And in those comments are two, and I hope the outline will cause, especially the students there, to think about these critical thinking issues, maybe in ways that we're not currently doing. And congratulations to Texas A&M and Texarkana. I was just through there, as a matter of fact, twice in the last week through Texarkana. And I think it's great that you got a program in supply chain. It's obviously a growing area. So students, there are jobs out there. My son just got a job with Dell and Boeing doing supply chain for them. So I know there are jobs out there. And I think that's a great career path as we more efficiently generate and create supply chains throughout. A little bit on my background, students. I have 2 degrees in economics, business, and 2 in technical areas of geosciences. I've been in the oil and gas industry for 40 years in a lot of different areas, and including supply chain side of it. So let me talk primarily, my focus is going to be on oil and gas and fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are still the most economic, the highest density of energy available in the world. The most important part of that is it's the best supply of energy to pull the remaining 25% of the world that's in really poor poverty. They don't need energy to live, but they need energy to get out of poverty. And the best way for them to do that is have the low cost, dense energy supply sources that the developed world has had for well over a century.
So Bill, I'm going to jump in and just ask you a few questions, because I think that most of the people here already know all the things that you're saying. So I'm going to ask you some tough questions.
All right.
Okay. So because I think they're at a higher level than just like barely undergraduate. So what I'm questioning, with your experience, do you see a relationship between broken supply chains in the energy world or the transition to energy, alternative energies, and a relation to like inflation? And here's like an even bolder question. Can the energy transition cause hyperinflation?
Well, and I just had a conversation with some of the past AAPG presidents about this very issue, Susan, so it's a good question. And this is the first time in human history, not the first time that we're going through a transition. We've seen many transitions from different types of technologies. This is, for example, the phrase is we didn't move out of the Stone Age because we ran out of stones, and the same thing will be true for petroleum. We won't run out of petroleum. But this is the first time in any of those transitions that anybody could think of, and that I brought up, that we're going from the most economic and the highest technical available form of energy to something that's less efficient. So I think that's something for the students to think about.
We have a
as
lot
I
of
mentioned,
APG members here too.
yeah, as I mentioned, the density of energy, there's nothing more efficient than the internal combustion engine.
But will it cause hyperinflation?
And well, here's what's happening what's happening on the supply side with where we're going. The problem with trying to phase oil and gas out is if you phase it out too fast. Let me give a statistic here first. When I came into the industry, 85% of the energy we used was from fossil fuels. Right now, about something in the mid 80s percent we're using is fossil fuels. We're not going to be able to get rid of fossil fuels. So the faster you step away from fossil fuels, the faster you're going into less efficient forms of energy, and therefore you're going to drive up the cost of energy because they're going to be less effective forms of energy. So a problem is what we've just seen is oil and gas prices have dropped over the past year. That was artificial because of the pandemic. And in the supply and demand. The demand for energy is not going to go away. The demand for oil is going up in normal years, about 1 million barrels a day. It was at about 106 million before the pandemic. When we come out of the pandemic later in this year, it'll go back to the 106, 107 and continue to increase at about 1 million barrels of use per day on an annual basis. At the same time, our production in the United States has dropped by 15%. So as we continue to see, and so we say, well, there's a supply coming on in Iran. Well, that's about 1 million a day. That covers about 7% of the drop that we've seen in the United States, out of the 15% that we've seen in the United States. OPEC really does not have, they talk about having additional supplies that they can bring on day. They really don't have much of a capacity to do that long term. So we're coming back to an equilibrium in oil and gas. That's why oil and gas has gone from $20 a barrel back to the $65 range. As economies around the world pick back up, the demand for energy will go back where it is. Currently, it's at about 95 million barrels a day. Well, normally it should be in the 105 to 107. It will get back to that before the end of the year. And as it gets back to that before the end of the year, because we've seen a tremendous drop in the supply in the United States, we'll see increases. So we are going to see hyperinflation. We're going to see hyperinflation on a macroeconomic level. We'll see it in oil and gas. We've seen lumber prices, which initially fell when the pandemic started, increase 400% now because the demand for lumber is so high and the supply is low. So the same thing could happen in oil and gas. And then it also can be artificial. For example, the pipeline in South the Colonial Pipeline has already been discussed. Another one of them is that the governor of Michigan declared a couple of weeks ago that as of Wednesday of this week, that line number 5, which goes through northern Michigan across the Mackinac Straits into Michigan, which supplies most of the oil for the Mideast in the United States and also for parts of Canada. The governor of Michigan ordered that line shut down. Now the line didn't shut down because the companies are saying she has no authority to do that. But if she did have the authority to do that and shut down that pipeline, the supply chain effects would be bigger than what they were for the Colonial Pipeline. So there's both artificial and real supply chain problems that could cause hyperinflation.
That's
and then the final thing.
Yeah, that's good. And Michael Campbell, who's
one more point on the hyperinflation.
Okay,
so these are some of the microeconomic effects that we see by supply chain interruptions. And then the other macro that we need to keep in mind is the money supply. And that's been mentioned already. The United States government no longer backs the dollar the way that it did historically, but it can print money. And if the wealth of the country, so the GDP or the measure of wealth of the country doesn't really change, and it's actually gone down about 5% during the pandemic, So the wealth of the country doesn't change, but all of a sudden there's 25% more money. Well, that is going to devalue the American dollar significantly. And I don't think we've seen those full effects yet, but it's coming. And we've seen it coming, and it's happened before. Some might go back and look at what happened when Jimmy Carter was president and the hyperinflation we had at that time. That's the kind of period I think we're moving ourselves into. And so we're going, I think that's a potential thing to consider when you're looking at potential inflation.
That's good. Well, thank you. And yeah, we're kind of out of time for this, but like, I think we need to make sure that we say that hyperinflation is potentially like Argentina level or Bolivia level or Zimbabwe, but high inflation could be, yeah, 20-30% a year.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael Campbell has a quick comment or question, and then we'll go to Jamie Daigle. Oh, well, Michael is saying that he wanted to ask about climate considerations. And so I think you addressed that, Bill, when you said that the governor of Michigan closed the pipeline due to climate.
Yeah, so let's talk about fossil fuels in general. The CO2 emissions of fossil fuels has come down significantly during the time where we're actually using more. A lot of that has been due to the reduction in coal usage, and total fossil fuels has gone up, even though coal's come down and mostly it's been replaced with natural gas, which is a much more efficient use of petroleum fossil fuels, and it produces less CO2. The other climate consideration, and this is something that I look at just to be fair in the process, and I ask other people to look at and be fair, is we really don't look at the CO2 emissions of what we call clean energy. As an example, Tom Smith just talked about lithium carbonate. Well, to change lithium carbonate, to take the mineral into a lithium oxide, which is used in batteries, it takes about there's about a ton of batteries in an electric car, and we generate 1,600 pounds of CO2 are emitted when we generate 1 ton. So about almost 2 tons of CO2 is generated per electric vehicle that goes out on the street. So without going into the details of the rest of that chain, supply chain, it takes about 100,000 miles driving an internal combustion engine to equal the amount of CO2 that is generated by manufacturing 1 electric car. And so that's not the crossover point. That's the point which is equal. So then you have to drive your electric car, then you continue to drive your internal combustion engine car. And how are you powering your electric car? Everybody says, turn it, but plug it in. We'll use electricity. Well, remember, 85% of your electricity is generated from fossil fuel. So again, you're generating more CO2 in that process. And so the only reason I bring that up is we need to be fair about the environmental effects of what we call clean energy. It is not clean. We're just changing where that CO2 is being generated. Not necessarily directly from your vehicle. It's being generated in the manufacturing process and the processing of the minerals and such. And so we need to be fair about some of the externalities associated with what we think of as clean fuels.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. And I think that to go on the other side, we need to realize that, technology is changing, and there are many different ways to store electricity that's generated, and that include things like saline solutions, the salt batteries, et cetera, and converting mines. So I think that, and then also even using geothermal to store solar. So there's a lot of opportunity for geologists to think about cleaner solutions that are more efficient than using the approaches that you're talking about, and also manufacturing.
Susan, I'm in total agreement. I think the point is that, I think what we need to be doing is using all forms of energy. And we need to be looking at the most environmentally friendly ways to be able to do each of those. We need to look at new technologies that are generating less We just need to be fair about what the externalities are associated with every one of them. And I think everybody's very familiar with the externalities associated with fossil fuels, but we need to be equally fair about other forms of energy that we're using and consider green also.
Great. Well, I wanted to give Jamie Daigle the last word, and welcome, Jamie. Jamie is the director of the Supply Chain Management Program at Texas A&M Texarkana. Welcome.
I'm the program coordinator, but yes, thank you. I come from there, and I wanted to say this is a great place to put me because I agree with Bill that there must be a transition to innovative technologies in order to drive change in the way that we do things, in order to be sustainable, economically friendly, environmentally friendly, and everything else. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, it's not, okay, let me try again. All right. All right, a little bit about me is I am an artificial intelligence-based computer programmer, and my expertise is in supply chain management. So I focus on the intersection of AI and supply chain. And what I try to do is build a program that is based on quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and blockchain technology, because the aim is so that the students can gain insights and also a competitive advantage for our local economy. And through supply chain and data analytics, then they get to play a role as, say, an investigator, or they get to try to solve some complex and adaptive environmental problems that also are because of our supply chain. And I like them to see what everybody else sees, but think what nobody else does by demystifying data, making data-driven decisions, and operationalizing that as well. So I give them theoretical frameworks to be able to question processes so that they know about their environmental footprint in what they do, so that they can find strategic ways and discover new ways forward. So our departmental aim is to build a pipeline of skilled laborers and business professionals that can go out there and drive changes in the way that we look at our processes in terms of, are we doing things sustainable, environmentally friendly, and can they play a role in economic development as well? And one thing that we have done to use artificial intelligence to also make a community impact is we built a model that integrates a real-time economic database that's shared between the university, the chamber, and local business leaders. And this model looks at different university models in the field. And with real-time information sharing, we can all be on the same page in terms of how we're building up our local economy, because it is the responsibility of anchor institutions to try to modernize the way that we do things, to modernize the way that we connect with one another, to drive positive change in our local economy, to try to combat inflation rates. I don't think that hyperinflation is a worry, right? Because that would be, looking at 1,000 times what things are today, or $1 costing $50 in the future. But inflation does persist, but it does take connecting the locals in a real-time way, because what we're doing is we're relying on people to go and communicate with each other. We're relying on people to go and talk to the chamber, talk to the government, talk to local business leaders, to all try to drive changes in playing a role in economic development. The AI-based model that I built for the chamber in Texas A&M, it actually connects everybody in real time with economic data sharing, so that we can all understand where we are today, what we need to do, and how do we pivot and adapt in a changing economic construct. So obviously things a year ago are not the same as they were today, but we have to have real-time data in a dashboard that we can look at to see how do we adapt our programs to meet the needs of a now community in crisis and an economic crisis. What can we do? And as Bill said, it is paramount to look at the innovations that we're teaching our students. They have to know quantum computing. They also have to know AI and know how to use environmentally friendly blockchains, because as you know, blockchain technology takes a lot of energy. And there are a few ways to combat that, but it takes seeing what everybody else sees, but thinking what nobody else does, right? So you have to build a pipeline of skilled workers that can have the acumen and the know-how to be able to use emerging digital innovations such as the Internet of Things, automation, AI, cloud platforming, big data, advanced analytics, and also through blockchains that are sustainable, and trying to work collaboratively with business partners and industry partners to do this. So I also like them to know that they can't be all things for all people, that we all become experts in a field. I'm an expert in AI and the supply chain. I'm definitely not an expert in blockchain technology, but I try to bring people into the classroom to showcase how can we make the blockchain that we're using with WIP tracking systems greener? What does that look like? How do we make sure that we reduce our environmental footprint to be able to be sustainable as well, but also be competitive in the region? So yes, it is paramount to train people on new innovative technologies. It's important that curriculum is updated, every 6 months. So I make sure that every 6 months that the supply chain at Texas A&M University Texarkana, our department has innovative curriculum. We are using simulations. We are building neural networks. So my data analytics class 1 builds a neural network, and they look at me like I'm crazy, like there's no way I'm going to build a neural network. And we simplify the process. We allow them to open their minds and be able to wrap their minds around how to do these complex things, because we don't want to be confined to textbooks that aren't relevant today and material that makes no sense, because we are dealing with something paradoxical than what we had before. And it is my responsibility and the responsibility of those in my department to build up a workforce that has the expertise to think outside the box and to deal and grapple with these types of issues.
I'm so glad to hear this. And I wanted to say it really ties back in too to what Meredith was saying at the very beginning about professionalism and being able to be flexible.
Right. Yes. We have to build with the model that I built with the communication sharing through a neural network and the Internet of Things. That does help us be able to understand the local economy and where we are today, and decipher what technologies we need to let our students be aware of to be able to make a big impact on local industries, which does play a small role in a broader effort to drive change in the local economy, right? So we all have a role to play, and our small role to play is to teach our students how to be adaptive to change through looking at the data, because it is critical for them to make data-driven decisions, but also know how to utilize AI, the Internet of Things, how to look and make sure that when they're using blockchain, that it makes sense. I tell them that, it is critical to look at the 3 Ps, the people, profit, and planet. You have to be sure that you are making an impact for the local economy, for your stakeholders. You have to be environmentally friendly. So these are the things that I like them to think about, because it's not as simple as getting a degree and going out there. You have to make sure that the classroom experience has simulations. I built an AI for a local business to help streamline their process, And every single semester I go and I take them on a field trip, and this past year has been virtually, to see the AI that I built, and so that they get to learn how Anne, which is an artificial neural network, but we call her Anne, does things differently for that company, because Anne can pick up a lot of different things than a human couldn't. And then they get to build their own smaller, simpler versions of Anne.
I love that. And you had a really good comment in the chat, and we will wrap it up here. But anyway, Alex mentioned that you opened his eyes about how to maybe use AI with the post-contract sourcing, et cetera. So that's great. And I would recommend too that all geoscientists do the same and start thinking of what we all do in terms of cause and effect of supply chain and so these complex interrelationships.
And what you really can do to make a big impact in all of your roles is think about what is the best way to break down barriers of communication. Who are the key players that are needed to be able to drive change in your local economies? And are we relying too much on people and their busy schedules every day? And is there this big process that we have to go through to talk about economics at a micro and macro level? Or is there a way that we can just simplify the process, create a dashboard, you guys all have access to it, and then you put in there what's going on? Okay, I just hired a student at A&M and they're killing it. They know how to use an AI, thank you. And they could post that to the dashboard. Or, hey, have you thought about teaching students this because I think there might be a gap? And then, that way, when the universities, local businesses, and government and energy companies, when they're all talking together in a way that simplifies the process, it drives quicker, better, and faster changes. And then we can pivot easier to be able to help our local communities, because that's what we all must do.
I love that. That's great. And we're out of time, but that was a wonderful final statement. And I just want to thank
you,
everyone. It was just so fantastic to go through this and look at things from a slightly different perspective. We'll be sending out the recording, and also I will be making some PowerPoints available as well. So I want to thank Meredith Faber, Patrick Ng, Alex Tardecilla, Larry Davis, Tom Smith, Bill Fairhurst, and Jamie Daigle for presenting, and also want to thank all of our participants. So it's wonderful, and thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.